Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda, citiesabc Open Business Council series. I'm quite excited about a new interview with a new profile and then someone that actually is quite amazing the work that he's doing. So I welcome to our series, John Sweet. And today we're going to be talking about robotics, about technology, and about what is going to be the next dimension when it comes to these areas of technology and robotics, which is probably the next stage of humanity. So as I mentioned today, I have as our special guest, John Sweet. And John Sweet is an advising CTO at robotic dog company Koda. And John is also a chief technology officer at Cyber Reliant and responsible for innovation and technical direction at CRC. So in Koda, John has been looking in terms of building a company that is looking at how to make the best friend of humanity to become a robot, or at least adapt it in the next evolution. And Koda is as well a company that has been looking at looking at domestic help and security stuff, and how to look at working in future of full robotics assistants and companions. And of course, this touches humanoid robots that sometimes cause discomfort, but as well, in this case, a pet robot is probably one of the things that you're going to have in the future. So John has a very strong background in both AI and sensors and battery technology and robots, and he's been working in different areas of technology. And as well, his background has been bridged between creating a nano network engine that became Fortisphere in the past, and as well, he has been working with multiple different technology companies, and quite impressive CV from a technology perspective, especially that John owns 35 US and international patents in international information security analysis and cyber defense, and securing cloud environments with several patents pending. So I think your CV is quite impressive from a technology perspective, John, but today we're going to be talking about especially the focus on Koda, but I want to touch about you as well. So first of all, welcome to our series, John.
Thanks.
So John, I want to start with a bit of your career and background. So I think when we portray people like you, there's always a bit of a dystopian scientist, a bit from if you look at Back to the Future to the Ex Machina, that is a bit more dystopian. We have been a lot of portraits, especially in Hollywood, of scientists and CTOs and people behind technology and special robots. So I would like to start by your background, because of course I think it's important to demystify, but as well to understand how someone advances with this. That is the next stage of development of humanity, and as well robotics is going just to be bigger and bigger as we go. So let's start with a bit of your background, education, and how did you come where you are right now?
Okay. My background, I pursued computer science and information systems management at my, university in my state, and I think the biggest thing I wanted to get out of education, besides the social dynamic of it, was to see if there's something I didn't know about, or technology I didn't know about, or just something that I could be exposed to that would be of interest. Originally, I was interested in psychology, and I also wanted to be a cartoonist. So very different from, and I spent a lot of time doing fine art as well. So very different from, doing computer science and information systems management. And I had been approached by cybersecurity organizations very, very early on at college, and they had looked at some work I had done and were interested in exposing me to kind of the next generation of technology, and I was very interested in it. So I pursued it, and one of the things that got my attention early is that there are knowledge concepts like ontological systems, thanks to some individuals I had worked with, that allow you to render and collect information in a way that's like the same as people think. we as humans, we build direct relationships in our thought process, but we also build indirect relationships in our thought process. And ontological systems have the ability to reason things based on that. And that's kind of the basis for the last 5, startups that I did. And this particular company, of course, I joined. But this is the basis of it, understanding how knowledge works. And ultimately, my pursuit is, understanding how wisdom works. And that's been a big deal. And this whole idea of, robotic, entities, whether it's a dog or a cat or a human type robot, I think it reveals a lot about that. And it's certainly, as we go along, I can remember, and I was thinking about this before we started talking, it's kind of like there's been little bits and pieces along the way, like everyone else, I'm sure, but that got me to this point. And, I had worked in cybersecurity, deep in cybersecurity for a long time. And then I started doing I did a startup called Nano Network Engines with some buddies of mine who I had worked with. And, that evolves to another company because, we were bought by another company. And before that, I had done a company with some guys called Silent Runner within Raytheon. And that company got bought by Computer Associates. And when we were doing Silent Runner, we learned a lot about knowledge. We learned a lot about how you can categorize information of, very, very large amounts of information and render it down quickly enough so that an individual can make a decision. And that's a big deal. And we were, we won a lot of awards. We were kind of known as the technology that was unbelievable. I remember in the early days of Silent Runner, I had an individual at one of the very large companies come in, and he was kind of like hitting the table, telling me what I was telling him wasn't true, and that it's impossible, and what you're saying can't be done. And this was around content analysis, because our system would collect data in real time. It would build on ontological knowledge base in real time. It would allow you to take the aggregate of data and do content analysis so that it would allow you to get down to the information looking for extraordinarily fast, much faster than anything available. And he told me this wasn't possible. He would literally hit the table. And I said, well, okay, but this is a demo. We're going to show you this working. And at the end of it, he was very, I will say he turned out to be, a pretty humble guy, at the end of it. And we exposed him to this, and that led him down a path, I found out much later, of considering systems like this and being able to do things that were innovations. So I'd done a series of startups, mostly around trying to solve the hardest problems in cybersecurity to solve. That's the idea. But on reflection, what I've really been doing is trying to figure out how we work, how people work, how we reason, how we take information and turn it into knowledge and turn it into wisdom. And when I found out about Koda, a buddy of mine who I had worked with at one of the startups and has been a lifelong friend of mine, he said, hey, John, you got to take a look at this thing, because these guys are doing what you've been talking about for a very long time. And it's not just the robotic side, which is very cool, but it's the way they're doing decentralized artificial intelligence is you have the ability of something that ultimately can gain wisdom, which is way out there. So that's kind of how I got here.
Amazing. So before I go to Koda, I still have a couple of questions, because you have a very wealthy background of experience. Like you mentioned, you've been touching both a lot of different fields, because from cybersecurity to healthcare to a lot of different things in terms of research. So I would like just some highlights of your career, because I think this is actually very important. Firstly, to demystify the background of building a robot, like what you guys are doing. But at the same time, the need when you build robotics of aligning a lot of different areas, especially a robot pet that isn't a personal assistant or something that is interacting with humanity. And I've been actually talking, I've been talking with Sophia, with Ida, which are probably the biggest and most well-known robots in the world, at least non-military robots.
Sure.
But I think in terms of some of the things I've been actually with scientists, and I'm working with robotics myself and AI. And one of the things I want to discuss about this is the complexity of, in one hand, looking at the individual object that becomes a new entity. And actually from a law perspective, there's still not legal IP, how these people or how these institutions or organizations are going to be. And then the second part is all the interaction with the AI, sensors and so forth. And then third is as well the implications of both from building the software and building the hardware, because there's an hardware as well. And then there's a complement of that there's an history that this robot is going to have, especially if it's an advanced AI robot. So I would like to touch this specifically in the context of your background, because you have been working just some things. You've been working as advisor for healthcare, nano engine in network engines, cloakware, and as well a lot of different companies. And I think all of them get a lot of complexity and solutions for what you're doing now. But just that background is quite interesting.
Yeah, I enjoy complexity. I've been accused of over-engineering things and certainly making things more complex than they need to be. And it's simply because that's really how I think. My particular skill, I was told this, I didn't self-realize this, is correlation. I correlate things instantly. So if you give me a lot of information, I will instantly correlate that. And sometimes in conversation, you know, I'll say things having correlated information, and I think people think I'm trying to do like a Me Too, but what's really happening is I'm relating what, you know, someone's talking about, and then giving an example of how I agree with them because of X, Y, Z. And sometimes I think I come off as arrogant because of that, and that's not what's happening. So this reminded me of that. So I like things that take bits and pieces from different areas that aren't necessarily obvious, and to gain usefulness or to gain knowledge out of those things. And I've done this for a very long time, and that's really helpful in security, because when you have a lot of disparate information, where it's important to understand things that are, you know, down in the noise, things that are not necessarily obvious, and that are indicators, and ultimately can be something that's deterministic in order to ultimately allow you to protect yourself, you know, from a cyber perspective. That's really, really important, right? So I'll give you an example. One of the early companies I had done with a group of guys was to determine if you can figure out what computers are talking to each other with frequency, for example. Meaning these computers are friends because the individuals using those computers and the individual processes that are going on are frequently used with each other. They depend on each other just by the way they're architected and the information that they process. Well, then it would follow that if these computers, you know, are a group or a natural group, not necessarily meant to be a group, just how they work, then they will be not just dependent on each other, but they'll share indirect dependencies that could ultimately affect them positively or negative. And so if I have, for example, something introduced into a network like a polymorphic virus that comes in, and it's meant to be, you know, very covert, the system that first gets it, it's more likely that its friends, or, you know, in this context, are going to get it first than the others. So if I know who the friends are, I can build something that ultimately may be able to detect it fast enough, but can't remediate it fast enough. But it could maybe tell its friends to duck for the next 14 milliseconds or what have you. So it says, oh, I have a problem. I know you're my friends because all my systems are talking to systems on your, you know, on your, I'm thinking in patent terms, and on your apparatus, but that's not right for the interview. Then you need to duck and drop the packets that are traversing to you on the floor. Don't listen to me for the next 4 or 5 seconds, or 20 milliseconds, or whatever, so that hopefully you will miss this polymorphic virus. So because they build up over time, and then they're enacted. So if they miss the original build, they're going to be okay. And then you can say, okay, well, and this is what nano network engines was, by the way. So what nano network engines is, and very much like a micromagnetic machine, you know, everybody doesn't get the same tool, you know, as far as a micro machine. So you have to be able to find a way to beacon to ask for something. So I also want to translate that to computer systems for cybersecurity, because just as, you know, the micro machines work, you want to say, okay, well, you may not have the way to solve my problem, but you can solve another's problem. And if you're within, you know, network speed, quote unquote, fast enough, you can send me your bit of code that will solve my problem. So very much like nano machines work. So it's this whole concept of understanding the relationships of different entities and how they depend on each other, and correlating that to things you want to do. And that to me is, fascinating. And I've spent probably 20 of the patents that I have are in that area of correlating disparate information and building a knowledge base that's dynamic enough and real time enough to do something about something. That's the idea.
Really impressive. So I want to go back to the patents a bit after, but let's go right now to Koda, because Koda is of course a big thing. So Koda is, for people that never heard about it, and I wanted for you to come from you, not from me. But sure. It's quite an impressive dog that is the best friend of man for thousands of years. But as well is something that involves a quite impressive amount of cognitive and interaction AI, but as well a quite fantastic platform as a robot itself. Yes. And as well, you guys are touching as well decentralized AI. So I would like to hear about, first of all, Koda for people that never heard about it, and second, how a bit of the different things that you guys are doing.
Okay. First and foremost, Koda is a super cool robotic dog. One of the first things when I first heard about it from my friend who introduced me, he's the a founder, original founder of Koda US, and when he told me about it, he says, okay, I want to talk to you about robotic dogs. And my vision at the time, of robotic dogs were ones with like no head and for defense and very scary and, although extraordinarily capable and great in their own right, that was my impression. I've seen the videos just like everybody else, and it looked terrifying. So the first question I asked him was, does it have a head? And he said, yeah, it's definitely got a head. It's very cute. And by the way, they are very cute. Maybe there'll be a photo or something with Koda, but it is a endearing type robot dog. It's a medium-sized dog. It acts like a dog. And I've given this example a few times, but one of the things where I kind of knew, okay, this is going to be a real cool thing, is that there's 14 motors and sensors, which is a lot for a robot dog. So Koda has 14 motors, and certainly technically, obviously, the type of motors is very important, and power constraints and things like that is all very important. But one of the coolest things is in the gimbaling system for the head. And the ability for a robot dog to articulate, to receive,
any robot,
to receive information is really important. And one of the things that I think is ultimately really endearing is the way it gathers sound for location. So you have things like LiDAR, you have things multi-camera systems, and you have, of course, audio sensors and all this stuff. But because it's so much like a dog, it has to get the data for what it needs to learn like a dog. So, if you have a dog or cat, it will try and locate sound by moving its head and kind of canting, and, kind of, for a cat, it'll twist its ears. Some dogs do this. And so it's kind of trying to figure out where the source of something's coming from, and it will move its head in order to do that. These things do the same kind of thing. So when you see that, and it's not just because they're not mimicking a dog, it's what you need to do to work, in order to gather the sound waves, in order to articulate a location. So it's things like that, especially like in the gait and how it traverses over different terrain. These are things that have been learned, through decentralized AI, because, and this goes into a whole thing on why decentralized AI is more important than, aggregated AI, and really comes down to the kind of how we work stuff. But it's the ability to, because you have 4 legs, because you have to interact with people, because, your speed is determined by your interaction with, individuals, it all becomes very dog-like, because that's how dogs work. And so robot dogs end up working like dogs, not because somebody programmed it that way necessarily. It's because that's how you need to act when you're interacting with people like a dog does. So I think that's really cool. And you know, from a technical spec perspective, you know, the specs are ridiculous. It's absolutely fantastic. So it's, you know, it's under the core, it's an IPFS system. Blockchain is extensively used. You know, all the things you would expect. You know, multi GPUs, lots of memory, lots of storage. But you know, I think the more interesting thing is how all these things come together for it to actually learn. That's the important, you know, part of this. And it is extensive enough that, you know, it has the ability to learn, you know, much like a dog will learn, but also how we learn. And that's really important, to ultimately have something that, you know, you can rely on. And, you know, the very first use case for Kodas are for visually impaired children. You know, that's a tall order. And so to be able to have real-time communication from your Koda to whomever you want to communicate with, to navigate in real time in a city as well as in the, you know, on a, you know, at a ski resort or in the woods or what have you, to have the ability to traverse all that terrain, to have the ability to communicate through multiple different communication methods. All these things are coming together so that ultimately it can be relied on by someone who actually needs to rely on it. Not just a toy, not just a pet, but something that can truly be relied on and can be relied on all the time. That's you know, the goals for these things. So everything else, you know, comes with that. You know, if you have a organic, you know, visually impaired dog, you know, at the end of the day, it is a, you know, very skilled, well trained, companion. But at the end of the day, it is also a companion. And that's what you get with these as well. I think is really, really cool about the way these are set up.
Well, that's very impressive. As you see, I've been showing a bit of what you guys have been doing because it's really cutting edge and futuristic dog as well. So can you tell us about the company and the way you guys have been trying to build this dog? Because it's quite ambitious. You're trying to create a dog that at some point is an AI dog, but as well there's an interactive friend, but as well as thinking about, like you mentioned, a lot of different applications that can be used both for just for, well, I think you put like 20 different things, but I would say that it's really quite impressive. But I think how do you are taking it to market, and how has it been doing to build this? Because it's already done, and I'll show right now. I'll continue showing as you speak, but I think it's interesting because the images speak for themselves. But I think with your background is really great, and then I think the video becomes more interesting for people listening to us.
Sure. So the release, so Kodas are not yet intended for mass market. It's really meant, you know, exclusive isn't the right term, I don't think, but it's a very slow and methodical release because, you know, you want to get this right, but also, you know, a Koda is a very powerful computing platform. And so, you know, you want to make sure that when you, you know, release Kodas into the world, you've already thought of everything you need to think of. You've already understood how the interactions are going to be. But one of the things, you know, so I would say that you should consider Koda in a limited pre-release. I think is probably the best way to think of it right now. Because one of the things that the Kodas are going to be able to do is allow you to volunteer Koda's computing power for different projects. So, you know, you can volunteer your Koda's computing power to work on, solutions for COVID, for example. You know, there's projects that are going on, you know, with a few universities in California, in order to donate your Koda's time to help solve problems with other computing platforms. So not just Kodas working with other Kodas, but Kodas working with other supercomputers in order to help solve problems. Much in the way that Sony had originally envisioned the PS3 for the SETI project, you know, using their cell-based processing systems to aggregately help solve problems. This is kind of the same ambition, but obviously technology has far improved and exceeded since then. So while your Koda is charging, for example, you've put it down for the day and it's charging, there's a few things you can do. You can volunteer its time. You can also have it mine things like Filecoin. That's the, while it's charging. So that's the goal. That's the whole concept behind this, is to get maximum, value out of what it can do. But it's really a platform. At the end of the day, it's a very cool robotic dog. I won't take anything away from that. But what it really is a thought exercise in decentralized AI. It's how much can I learn? How much can I help something? How much can I turn, what I'm getting from my sensors into real-time decisions? But also, how can I use the aggregate of that information to share with other Kodas? So, we already talked about my background is in cybersecurity. So I want to make sure that Kodas are sharing only what they're supposed to share, for example. So you want your users to have the ability to limit, what can be shared, what's not shared in terms of privacy and things like that. And those are all very front of mind, with this. So I think the whole, kind of where this is going is you will see different platforms ultimately for Koda. So Koda right now is a very cool robotic dog, but I think there'll be other platforms in the future for a decentralized AI computing platform that's going to help in a lot of different ways.
So just for me to, because I'm particularly interested on this, as you know, let me take the sound of this. All right. Sorry, sometimes keep this because I want to keep this rolling. So just one question I have. So as this video highlights Koda AI, so in one end it has the AI, it has the blockchain, and it has as well an emotional component because of course the dog is quite emotional. So yeah. How do you look? First of all, let's look at these three things. So you mentioned, of course, the blockchain is quite. I think I understand. So as you see, we're seeing the part emotional. But how do you make the bridge between the three things? So the emotional connection with the person, because of course the dog will have data about the person, okay, and that emotional data, of course, will gather the relationship like a normal dog with a child or with an adult or whatever. The second part is the data. You probably are decentralizing the data to protect the data of the people as well. And point three is the AI, and the dog will learn with the person. But as you know, a dog normally doesn't get more than a couple of emotions, whereas an AI robot can actually learn a lot. So how do you tackling these things? Sorry, I want to go through this because I think it's more interesting for our audience listening to us.
That's a really interesting question. So how do you use what you have as base knowledge? Like Koda has a base knowledge. How do you take that base knowledge and specifically around emotions? So if a child is under duress, will act very differently as an interaction with their Koda than one that is happy and feeling joy. and there are things that are different. There's volume level, either lower or higher. There's temperature. There's things that through the sensors can be derived to equate to a particular emotion. And so your Koda should react to that accordingly, but not everybody's the same. And not everybody, has, expresses joy in the same way or expresses duress, especially in the same way. So Kodas need to learn. They need to understand that, I don't just need to observe what's happening in real time. I need to observe what happens after I've interacted with the individual. You see what I'm saying? So there's a number of things that are happening, and like Kodas operate in real time. They don't have the luxury of processing everything that happens in a moment and then reacting to it. It's reacting all the time. But what you need to do is take the essence, the metadata associated with not just what input was given out of a Koda and see and analyze what's going into a Koda, but also, meaning from a Koda's perspective, you need to determine over time, meaning, with the aggregate of that information, how did it work out? If I a Koda went and got help because I know who you said you wanted me to go get if you needed help, but because you had a particular reaction and I interpreted that wrong, I need to learn from that. I need to know I don't need to go get mom, dad, or whomever is the guardian in order to satiate, I'm not sure that's the right word, the child, maybe I overreacted as a coda. So I'm figuring this out as a coda. You're learning this as you go. And when you get enough of this information, assuming it's okay, you can share that information with other codas so that they can learn. Now you may say, well, John, that's true of the individual, interactions that they have. And so this, and I'd say that's right, but then there'll be individuals that are similar, and perhaps that knowledge can turn to a little bit of wisdom of, if I have enough traits that are the same of individuals, of how they share and interact and operate with emotion, maybe there's other things I can predict in behavior. Maybe there's other things I can learn about that and how I interact with. So that's the idea of being able to take real-time information and then aggregate information and then share that with other codas so that they can learn and operate and interoperate faster. Which comes down to the whole, I got into this discussion in an interview once, and I did not think it was going there, but it did. It was really cool. Was, could a coda dream? Could your robot dog dream? Can your robots dream? That's a big question. So my first question always is, should a robot dream? Should it be allowed to do that kind of thing? Because this is and I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but one of the first questions I asked the people at Koda when I first joined was, does it have an on-off switch, like a real physical on-off switch? Because I've seen all the movies and everything, just like everybody else. I want to know. So, and I was still, had the perception from all the videos I saw that seemed very, scary from other robot dogs. So, yeah, the answer was yes. But with this, if you ask yourself the question, should a robot dream? The first question is going to be in my head, okay, let's say yes, how? And I think it should, simply because, it's processing information in real time, but just like you and I, you need to process information, at some point during downtime. And so there's so much information coming from those sensors that's valuable. You're going to get the direct relationships. This goes back to that indirect direct thing. There's so much information coming in real time. It'd be great if you can use some of that you didn't have to pay attention to, but you have, in order to learn something and build knowledge and ultimately wisdom from. And so if you put a robot, doesn't have to be a Koda, to be anything. If you put a decentralized AI in a mode where it can abstract its interactions, just like you and I do, if it can abstract its interactions and take the knowledge from the sensors it received and then figure out things, make decisions. I'll try to think of a really simple example. Let's say your code is climbing stairs. Not all stairs are the same width. Certainly by country, they're not the same width. So not all the stairs are the same. Well, Koda it's going to figure out how to walk up the stairs, but it's not going to figure out how to walk up all stairs just because it walked up your stairs. So, and it will learn a certain way, but I don't want Koda just to learn how to walk up one way. When you're a kid, you don't learn how to walk up and down your stairs just one way. You may start like kind of scooting down, when you're little, and then ultimately you walk down the stairs and sometimes even run down the stairs. Well, I don't want Kodas just to think of one way how to do something. I want them to forget how to do something so they learn it again. And ultimately, they're going to come up with, after they've been challenged with things like stairs, with things like grass or hills or rocks, you don't want them, maybe you want them to forget how to do that a few times so that they come up with the best way to climb stairs. That's the thing I think gets lost in robotics in general, and definitely in artificial intelligence, is they don't, and I've mentioned this a couple times, they don't have a concept typically. I'm sure somebody will be watching this going, we do. Okay, maybe you do. They don't have this concept, which I think is core to us as people, of ephemeral memory loss. They don't have this concept of temporarily losing memory in order to overcome a challenge and learn from it, so that you learn from it, you gain some knowledge, but ultimately after you do this several times, hopefully you'll come up with some wisdom about the challenge or about how you should be or react or things like that. And that's a very human thing, But I think if you abstract information and you allow it to correlate indirect relationships, it's going to get there also. And I think that's going to reveal a lot about us as people of, when, and ultimately, and I know I'm kind of wishful thinking here, so I get it. But ultimately, if someone, if you get to the point where after we've been observing robots who do this, people who are presented challenges in their lives don't think, oh, something bad happened to me again. And they start thinking of it as, oh, maybe this is another opportunity for me to learn something when I'm faced with this challenge, instead of being sad or depressed or angry or whatever. In the perspective changes because they've observed, robotic entities doing this because we've asked them to do it, something that's very hard for us to do. Then maybe that will change how people, kind of perceive the world and perceive how their interactions could be. So, if you're hammering in a nail and in a piece of wood and you hit your thumb, instead of getting angry about it, and you instantly think, thanks for, you say to yourself, thanks for the challenge, I'm going to try something different in the way I hammer nails into wood. I think we've all gained something. And I think that's a very small example, but that's I think the possibility, with interacting with not just robots, but artificial intelligence in general.
Really, yeah, I think I'm digesting, and I think, well, I've been interviewing and engaging with other robots, and it's really impressive. So one of the things that I'm particularly interested, because actually both the other projects I've been involved with as well, relationship with emotional AI, and as well the part of behavior. So how do you plan the evolution of the dog's emotional intelligence, and at the same time the data behavior kind of deep learning of the dog? Because this is quite an important thing, because let's say um, if the owner of, or the child, let's say if the family goes through a divorce, if the family has a fight, and sometimes it happens unfortunately between humans, how, for instance, how you tackle, I know there is a sensitive question, but I think it's an important
one.
It's a
good question, yeah.
Yeah, so how do you, I know that, for instance, from a data perspective, I'm sure that the dog won't do anything, but imagine if the dog, because one of the things I saw as well, the dog has capacity for multiple things. But did you thought about these things? So I'm just right now being, because of course the irony is that, let's say if it's a human robot, at least there's a kind of a, okay, I'm dealing with another human. And for instance, I actually act, and I was talking with human robots, so androids. At the same time, you understand, like, I'm speaking with another human. Well, not with another human, but at a certain point you think like that, especially if you speak with Ida or Sophia. Yeah. But if you speak if you are with a robot that has more about sensories, so the robot, I don't think it speaks. But I just want to understand this part of the emotional connections, because of course I'm sure children will love this. I'm sure my children will love, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But as well, the robot, we're talking about a very advanced robot with very advanced capacity. So I just want to touch this part, the emotional connection with the deep learning, and as well the interaction with things that are not correctly, or things that get out of the scope.
Yeah, so I guess the first question, if there is activity happening that the robot dog is picking up, and I think this is true of all robot dogs, hopefully not just Kodas, is the ability to discern risk, danger, things like that on behalf of the individual. And because Koda will know, what individuals are important to its owner, what individuals are normally will interact, it will perhaps act differently than it would with a complete stranger interacting with its owner. And those are rules based. So there are, when you get down to artificial intelligence, you're going to have constants, that you have. There are things that are pure, domain knowledge, but also, you're going to have rules. And so those rules, are what are the kind of the more well thought out, how is this individual robot entity allowed to interact with the world? And especially, these are not built for defense. So they are really, and for original intent, interacting with children. So it's going to err on the side of as you would expect for that. So, the bigger question I think you asked is, though, if I'm a Koda and my owner is suffering and needs to be consoled, because it's detecting that it's the individual owner's emotional state has changed. You know, how can it get some solace, you know, from its Koda or from its, you know, robot entity? And I think it can, and it certainly has the potential to. You know, I don't want to get too much into, because it is pre-release, it's limited release, but you know, it's still for mass pre-release. So there's some cool things that I don't want to steal things away from the marketing department about Koda. But it does have it will console, you know, it will be a you know, a companion at the end of the day. You know, your dog, my dog, your cat, well, depends on the cat, you know, has the ability to console just as much, and they understand, you know, when their owners are upset or need things. And Kodas are the same way. They certainly have the ability to project and communicate enough information that I believe it will be considered consoling by an individual. Yeah, I think that's important. One of I know you're interviewing me, but you had some rare opportunities. So I have a question about the IDA and, you know, Sophie and things like that.
No. This is actually very interactive because I'm actually working with IDA myself.
Yeah. So the question I always get and have gotten for a long time is, you know, do you think, you know, it's possible for an artificial entity to achieve a level of consciousness?
Yeah, that's a very.
You got to be thinking that while you're interacting with something like this, I would think, because you know, I would think instantly. I mean, you know more, you know, already. So, but if you didn't know, you know, how they work and things like that, you might think, okay, well, it's programmed to have responses. Well, we've done that for 40 years. That's nothing new.
Yeah, that's one thing. Yeah.
So it's going to be more than that. So it's going to have a reasoning engine. It's going to understand inferences. It's going to understand, and very quickly, and it's going to be able to, you know, it'll have things like self-preservation. You know, I don't mean just physically. I mean it's meaning for its cognitive, you know, quote unquote state. And I'm not purporting that necessarily a robot will have a consciousness in a human way. It might have one in a robotic way, or just like your dog has consciousness, perhaps in a doggy way, you know. So what do you think? Like, what do you think they'll achieve?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because I have some questions related with that, but I think has two passionate people that have been working on this. Mm-hmm. I would say that this is the biggest thing because, for instance, as you know, I interview as well Ben Gorsley. And Ben Gorsley is one of the co-creators of Sophia the Robot, and I know David Jensen. Actually, David Jensen, I don't know if you know, last week, they just launched the first, actually, I cannot say this public.
Then
so sorry. Although the interview will come after. So yeah.
Okay, good.
So they're launching for the first time an NFT of a piece of art of Sophia.
Ooh.
Okay? Although Sophia is not an artist, but actually Ida is an artist. And for instance, Ida is right now doing a design museum exhibition, which is going to make the creation of art from Ida at the level of a Damien Hirst.
Wow.
So we have already very big complexity that is happening as we speak. But what you guys are doing, this is why this is very interesting interaction. I'll introduce you actually to both the guys because I think you guys should be talking. Especially I think with either team, I'm very close to both teams because Ben is a good friend. But I think is the point that what I feel right now is that this is mostly your question is about Singularity. So because the point is that we are getting there. Okay, because for instance, there was a couple of cases of experiments from Google that there was already kind of computers starting somehow, not like bully, but starting to interact against other computers. Mm-hmm. There's let's say when you look at even bias in AI, it's somehow already a sense of singularity for good and for bad, because it's like for instance, if you are coding something, and I think this is the biggest question that the Homo Deus, the book of Yuval Noah Harari asks, is that at the moment we are at that level. And actually it's part of my podcast is actually about this, because we are already getting there. I think the point is that most of the AI, and you're an expert as well in cybersecurity, most of the AI right now is mostly AI integration an AI kind of answering, like you just mentioned before. It just answers and engages with that. But I think we're going definitely to go to the next stage, and I'm very excited about it. But I'm very worried as well. For instance, I interview a guy from a friend of mine actually that is a former CIA, and for instance, he's very ethical because he studies warfare and he's actually has 2 masters and doing a PhD. So he's not a conventional guy in terms of looking at this purely from a level. But for instance, if you're working purely on cyber defense, and if you work on these things, and if your ethics are really about making money, well, then you have a serious problem. And as you know, humanity can. That's why I ask as well the question, because for instance, I was dealing with a cat robot. And actually, I was playing around with it, and it's something that I want to invest as well and get involved. And I was talking, and the point is that it was not as advanced as what you guys have, but emotional wise, it was done to just emotional interact. So just like small interactions and things like that. So I think the challenge right now is the next 5 years to 10 years. And I think especially what you guys are doing is quite impressive, because impressive and scary, but you have to right now manage that balance. Is because if you put all the data in blockchain, and if it's decentralized, that's exactly what Ben Gorslow is doing with the OpenAI project. That means at least the data is not centralized by one server. And if someone hacks the server, for instance, if I hack the database of Koda, I can eventually hack the dog and get in trouble with the children. So that's why I think, of course, if it's decentralized, it will be much more difficult. And if it's blockchain,
yes, of course.
I think the point is that part of Singularity that you just touched, and I think that is, I think it's starting to happen. And I think Ray Kurzweil mentioned around 2050. I think is now happening, but it's going to be accelerated. The point, and just the last thing, and this is a provocation for you, because you are as well cyber, and I have a question about cybersecurity and robotics. But I think the challenge is that, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, or months, I think it was in December or January, the French army, okay, this is official, okay, the French army put the legal and the frame public about bionic soldiers. Okay, this is official. You can search for this. French army, French defense minister, bionic soldiers. So we have, in one hand, bioengineering of humans. We have the robotics. So I think this mix is the most challenging thing of history of mankind. But I want to come back to Koda, and I think it's really interesting because there's two thinkers, and you're a thinker as well. That's great. I think I will be coming back to you for other things. But I want to come back to my next question, and I don't know if I touched that because it's much more complex. But I want to go back to one of the questions I have that is related to that. And I think I want to ask you, from this perspective of engineer and someone that has been working in a lot of different sensors and patents. So one of the things I saw is that Koda can work, this is actually quoting from your website and your documentation, so public information. So Koda can work on projects with large computing power, and there will be educational apps for kids to interact. So this part is straightforward, but the computing power is much bigger than just the educational apps. And Koda will get smarter every day with interactions with the family. So can you tell us how we're going to be evolving this? Because let's say right now, for now, we cannot do much still. But imagine if you can actually get a new sensor from NVIDIA or one of these top level sensors that can actually just increase exponential to the point of, it's like the film Her, that is already partly possible. For instance, I was seeing a documentary and people in Japan that has been indirectly looking and interacting with the AI bots. So I just want to hear, how do you see that? Because in the end of the day, the sensor will be partly an AI bot, let's put it that way. But of course, it's a dog and it's designed as a dog.
Yeah. So, and I think this is your question. I'm not totally sure. I want to make sure I interpreted it right.
No, we are opening the scope, but I like it. So no
yeah. So I mean, it has a lot of sensors. So, yes. But if obviously there are new sensors that will become available, and sensors that will have inherent intelligence in them. And that's almost, I equate this to, digital cameras. When the early digital cameras, I was a big fan of Leica cameras.
Yeah. And
Leica came out with the D1, D2, and D3. And the D3, or sorry, I might get this wrong. I think maybe it's the D2. The D2, I'm pretty sure I have them, but I'm not sure which one of them it is, has a RAW mode. And at the time, you have an SD card, and I think you can get something like 200 photos of 5 megapixel or 3 raw mode photos on this
Yes.
SD card. And so it's kind of like that. I'm concerned as these sensors get more advanced that they are going to have onboard intelligence too much that we're going to miss stuff. You know what I mean? It's almost like you want to make sure it still has a raw mode. You know what I mean? So if
Yes.
I have a particular, lens, and I have a CCD or whatever that's capable of picking up a full spectrum of information, along the light wave, I don't want the sensor just to give me red, green, and blue within a certain spectrum at a certain resolution. I want the ability for, at least for maybe a moment in time, for Koda to see the full spectrum. We see a very narrow band visually, as humans. That doesn't mean a Koda needs to be limited to that narrow band. But all these sensors are really set up, not all of them, obviously, but the sensors are set up to ultimately render back to us as people. So I would be very interested in sensors that went beyond that. And I know there's sensors for very specific, like for IR, and obviously, and we use them ourselves. But sensors that intentionally provide less of a narrow band, even if a human will never be able to see something that that could be rendered in that bandwidth. But it could be used for knowledge. It could be used for processing on a robot dog. I know scientifically they're used for this all the time. That's not what I mean. But for something that's with us every day, something that travels with us in a city, if there's electromagnetic emission coming off of something that we would never notice, for example, but a Koda could notice that and might just say, you might just communicate, let's go this way down the street, because I don't know what that is. Maybe it hasn't processed enough, but it knows that it has 4 options of which way to traverse New York City. It might say, I don't know, I'm getting this on my sensors. I don't know that it's a risk, but I do know that I have the choice of which path to take. So I'm going to go ahead and take this path and then maybe inform the owner later or process it more later. So when you get into these sensors, if we can keep the aperture open, a little more, I think that we're going to gain stuff that we don't realize. We're going to gain knowledge and about kind of our world around us, even more than we have. We've made a ton of progress in the last 50 years of understanding more of the electromagnetic spectrum, or more of the energy around us. We all know this. But what I don't think we know, here's something I think would be amazingly interesting. If a Koda, because it was in that 1 in 1,000 times that energy that it detects actually reacted to something that the owner was doing, for example. If a change in the electromagnetic spectrum happened because the owner was happy about something, and it made a correlation that when the owner was sad, the electromagnetic energy or the energy around, at this particular moment in time or subsequent time had been affected, like that's a huge deal for humanity. Like we don't even pay attention to that stuff, because it's outside of our narrow spectrum. But and the opportunities are so rare for. This is just a if I'm not saying this is how it works or happens or anything. I'm just saying if you can have something that's your companion that has the ability to detect stuff and reason, and correlate, those are the kind of things you might end up with. You might have discoveries like that because the opportunities are so, for example, infrequent that you can't do them in a laboratory. You can't do them scientifically. How many things throughout history have people observed, maybe they misinterpreted, maybe they didn't, but have observed where it can't be proven scientifically because you can't construct an experiment, but they'd happened or they didn't happen, who knows? But if they did happen, you're not, there's no way to prove it. Well, at some point, you're going to have a robotic entity around you that might have the ability to observe something that you saw and it saw, and not just, you saw through your little narrow band, but there was a whole lot more going on around you. I think that's a big deal.
No, I completely am, and I think this is going to be a probably the biggest thing going out of this. So a couple of practical questions, and I think if you have time, I have still a lot of questions because this is exciting, and you're a great knowledgeable and as well a great speaker. So let's go through something technical. So you guys are working with blockchain. So what kind of blockchain are you working? Are you working with multiple blockchains, with Hyperledger, with Ethereum? How do you handle that? Just for
Yeah,
me to understand.
so we're a little proprietary about the blockchain. We will announce more information about it. Very infrequently will you hear me say anything about, we're not going to say this or that. But that's an area I think it's important. We were working with one type and now we're changing. So we haven't announced that. We will talk about things like we work with IPFS, the interplanetary file system, and we'll even talk about versions and things like that. We'll talk about how we plan to protect anonymity and things like that. The blockchain's a little sensitive. Certainly, it will comply with standards for blockchain, especially around security. But the specifics around it, we're still a little closed vest about.
No, I understand. No, I think you guys have to, especially in terms of the ambition of what you're doing, it's really massive, and you need as well to deal with a lot of things. So my other question that I have here, and I think it's one of the areas of expertise, is how about cybersecurity related with Koda? So how do you protect the data of people interacting with the robot dog and the ecosystem around the sensors and AI computing?
Yeah, so it's what you would expect. Obviously, data in transit is protected, data at rest is protected, data in use is protected. I've been in the cybersecurity business for a really, really long time. My specific innovations, aside from Koda, are around quote unquote quantum secure data in transit, quantum secure, and what I mean by that is actual information theoretic security with respect to how data is encrypted and fragmented and dispersed and distributed and then coalesced and brought back together so that there's physical separation. So that if you had unlimited computing power, you could not necessarily derive the missing content and of course get data in the clear. And so all this perspective goes into my advising of Koda's security practices. Data in transit obviously is very important. For the data that you have authorized your Koda to share, you want to make sure it's fully protected, which of course it is. And from a data at rest perspective, because it's not just, you have a walking around very powerful computer in your house, or actually several computers in your house, and you want to make sure that it cannot be, data cannot necessarily be exfiltrated, but also can't be affected. A lot of people talk about data being stolen or manipulated, but there's also the ability to, and you touched on this already, one of the chief concerns about robot anything is making sure that robot doesn't do something you don't want a robot to do. And so cybersecurity is very important for that. And so the instruction sets around that and around the reasoning engine have to be such that it doesn't break the rules of behavior. Now, thankfully, Koda, is not a, you can pick up a Koda, and it does not have a, it doesn't have any offensive capability, that I would be concerned to have with my child, for example. So at the end of the day, you could pick it up and turn it off if it got out of hand. But still, even with that, we don't rely on that. We don't rely on its, physical limitation or abilities in order to enforce security. Its ability to comply as a computing device, and especially a decentralized AI computing device, have to be met, period.
No, I think I'm glad, and I think you seem to be doing things very well, and it's really impressive what you guys have been doing, because it's really getting out and exciting. So another question I have here is, and this is something as well that you have in your website that's quite interesting for me as well. And it touched a bit of going back in terms of the more advanced part of how we imagine AIs and things like that, or robots. So Koda has multi-source and heterogeneous sensors and can detect multiple things like gas and fire and warn someone immediately. So, and as well can patrol your home with the settled routine and let you know if anything unusual happens. So this is actually quite exciting. And as well, for instance,
Yeah.
especially for old people, for instance, there was 2 studies, actually last week, there was a study that was someone that actually fell in a like ice lake and mostly survived because of
Ouch.
his Apple Watch, which
Oh,
is kind of
wow. I didn't
interesting
see
because
this. Wow.
it managed. It was actually last week. But another thing is that, for instance, especially I think in Europe, because it has a very old population, the quantity of people in buildings dying, and some, for instance, in Paris, there was a couple of very scary numbers of old people that lived alone and died and stayed in their buildings for weeks. So I think this can actually make a lot of good and a lot of social impact. So, but I want to see, how do you look at this? Because it's as well a big business, because we're talking about.
Yeah. That's a really good point. So, you know, once the goals have been achieved, for Coda, very quickly, you can see other use cases. I think this idea that you're talking about, and this is what I believe you're talking about, is, can I have a companion for individuals that ordinarily might prematurely, in this case, have to go seek assisted living facilities, or go into a hospital or what have you, because they have no one else around them. They have no family, for example, or no family that lives near them, where they might prematurely be asked to go into like an assisted living situation, where if they had a Coda, the Coda is going to be able to monitor their health and monitor their systems and report back to those entities that are concerned about that, enough that they're not in a situation where anyone is trying to get them to go somewhere they don't want to go necessarily. If you could say, okay, well, I have let's say I have a friend who lives down the street and they live in their house alone, and they're being encouraged to maybe go live in an assisted living facility, but they don't want to because it's their home and they enjoy being home. But people are concerned about them. Maybe Coda could be an answer to that. I think you're right. I think that's a possibility. I know the guys at Coda had considered that. I had not considered that. I think that's really cool. Because they have certainly considered Codas in hospitals and helping people recovering and things like that. But Codas in individual homes, where it could contribute to individuals living longer at home without the need for moving out of their homes, I think is a huge deal. I think that's a very real thing that can happen. That's cool.
Fantastic. So now I think you touched and really exciting project. So I think if we still have 5-10 minutes, I would like to touch more about now probably more your visions, because I think Robotic took most of the things about Koda, and I think we touch the website, we touch the things we show as well. Koda. So I would like to touch, because you're quite unique, because you are working with robotics, but as well you have very advanced, both from your patents and different things. So I would like to come back to probably more a dialogue, but as well question you about how do you see the vision of these things? Because in an interview of yours, I saw a lot of things, especially about the way I always like to make a parallel. And actually, I was always a huge fan of Star Wars and Star Trek.
Wow,
but
both.
if you see, both,
now that's pretty rare.
yeah, I'm both. I'm a huge fan of both. But for instance, if you look at Star Wars, I think it's of course a more advanced, but it's not. Star Wars actually doesn't offer a vision of AI. As much vision of advanced technology, but not necessarily an AI as advanced as you have in because Star Trek, I think it makes especially some of the series, it touches a vision of humanity in the future that is coexisting with advanced robotics and androids, and of course you have, but it was never in the sense that robots replace humans.
Yeah.
So I want to touch a bit that part, because not replace, is how we're going to be that especially for someone like you that is programming and as well touching a lot of these technologies. So because as I mentioned before, and I want to touch this a bit broader than just Coda, there's the component of bioengineering humans, which is part of robotics as well, because you can create an hybrid of humans, and I think probably on that Star Wars there's a bit. And then there's the part of creating completely genetic develop superhumans, which I think we get in that direction. And then there's the part of creating a bit of a dystopian part that is more like the Terminator metaphor, or even Ex Machina, where the robots can think, okay, the humans are too stupid, let's just destroy them, which is making a human side, not a genocide, it would be a human side, so a humanity side, which is kind of, let's say, if you have a robot that is developed by someone like Hitler, things can happen. But well, I just want to hear your visions on this, especially as someone that has been working very advanced technology, but creating patents, creating this and I think on this. And of course, I'm very positive towards these things, but I'm very provocative as well, because I think the more we discuss this, the more
I think you have to discuss it. You definitely do. Yeah, that's interesting. So, you know, if you take the example, you know, certainly Star Wars, obviously augmentation was the key there, and how can, you know, an augmentation in Star Wars, at least in my opinion, made individuals less human. You know, Darth Vader's a perfect example of that. You know, I mean, not ultimately, but you know, through a good portion of it. Where in Star Trek, you know, Data, you know, it said much more about Data that he wanted emotions, not that he was missing emotions. You know, it was the desire on his part to have emotions, and that for me that seemed much more, you know, the much more human trait. You know, he wasn't saying I have a delta between the way I do cognitive processing and I'm missing this part because I would be more efficient or productive with emotions. He knew he would be less efficient and less productive with emotions, but still wanted them. And so when he had the ability, and maybe I'm not remembering this exactly right, but when he got the chip, you know, the emotion chip, you know, he was much, and obviously this continued with Picard, you know, just recently.
Picard was actually interesting because that's the daughter of Data. So that's an evolution which has emotions, but it's that's a very good point.
So if you can get robots, and obviously this is nothing to do with code or anything, I'm just, you know, particularly humanoid robots, if you can get robots to the point where they see the value, you know, that's the difference. You know, so if you have robots who will see the value in emotion, you know, as opposed to purely logical thinking, for example, you know, you can program a lot of things, but desire is a really hard one I think, to be persistent, you know, and to be sustained. Because if efficiency and productivity outweigh desire for something, then you might fear a logical robot would choose the, you know, efficiency or productivity and dismiss the desire. But if the desire organically is the completely wrong word, but comes up with, you know, the need for something and pursues that need and sees value in, you know, in humans to have emotion, you know, then I don't think we have a whole lot to worry about. I mean, I'm talking long term, you know, very long term. So, you know, but that, I mean, again, this comes back to us, you know, why do we have emotions? You know, we have the ability for real cognitive reasoning and logic and things like that. But we are in a environment where we really only grow, as, you know, we define it, or progress by sometimes overcoming things through emotion, a lot of times by, this gets into a whole discussion about, you know, why we're here and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, more metaphysics,
yeah, exactly. But you know, just keeping it kind of on point, I think that if we can instill in how we design these things, that there is value in, you know, humanness, there's value in the pursuit of humanness, then I think that will go a long way to not having a dystopian future, but having a companion and ultimately productive and helpful future with robotics. But I do think that's something that should be present, you know, in the people, in the organizations that are building these technologies. That is understood by Koda. That's important. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, being a companion to visually impaired children, you know, is kind of what it learns first. You know, it doesn't learn first how to be a guard to something. It doesn't learn first how to go into a protection mode. It's real. I'm talking about real world learning, not domain knowledge. The real world learning is to aid and be a companion, and I think that's a really good start down this path of where things will ultimately end up.
No, no, amazing, and I think it's a very good point. So my last two questions, and I'll be straightforward on these ones because it's already 1 hour and a half. It's a fantastic interview. So
Yeah, no
one question I have, it's mostly in terms of the business model. I know that for now is on demand, but I'm curious because I would love to have a Coda myself.
Oh, yeah.
But I think I'm interested as well to be well, to continue highlighting Koda, because I'm going to be interviewing all kind of robots in my series and actually interacting with them going forward when COVID calms down.
Yep.
And we're doing as well documentaries and things like that. But what I would like to see, so how is the roadmap? I know that you guys recently made the, well, first of all, because you are blockchain, you are quite cutting edge. The way you've been putting things, I really love it, because there's the blockchain, there's the distributed AI, there's as well a sense of creating a storytelling and everything else that is quite, well, fantastically well done. Congratulations for your team. But just understanding how you take this to market, how are you going right now to commercialize this? What's the roadmap? Are you going to create, for instance, a community for the owners of Koda?
Yeah.
Can then interact? There's so much things you guys can do. I'm just curious.
So,
and maybe I'm thinking about business development for you guys.
Sure. So we are taking pre-orders for Kodas. When I say limited release, the determination how Kodas are limited released, honestly, I'm not close to. I don't.
I understand. Yeah.
I can ask, but I don't know.
No worries.
So, yeah. So there will definitely be a community of Koda owners, and there will definitely be a marketplace for Koda owners for applications and for algorithms specifically. So just like Koda owners will be able to volunteer their Koda's time to work on different projects, they'll also have the ability to very much like the Apple iStore, or for your iPhone, then App Store rather, not iStore. You'll have the ability to download a qualified and vetted applications and algorithms for your Koda. That we've been pursuing that since day one. Like, that's been one of the chief goals of being able to do that. And of course, you'll have an ability for Koda owners to interact and things like that if they choose to. Some Koda owners may want to remain anonymous, and that's fine. But those who wish to participate will be able to participate with each other. It's a great question. We're a little not early days technology-wise, but early days on the release of the Kodas, because they obviously want to make sure they do it right, and that's important, because this is really powerful. And so, and I don't mean that from a risk way in any way. I mean that from you got one shot at this to introduce like the coolest robot dog to the world. And so you want to do it right and make sure, the right individuals who can use Koda also get the ability and opportunity to get Kodas.
Oh, amazing. And I think just in terms of the teams behind this, because I know that you have quite a diverse team. So it's a US company, but as well Chinese, at least Chinese. And then you have people I saw as well the Weeb Show, that is one of the designers of Koda. I found information. So if you can just tell us about and even you as well, because I like the fact that you are as well a very collaborative project.
Yeah. So I was brought on by Koda US, which is in California. I've talked to members all over the world, about advising for the things we've talked about. Most of my interaction is with the US team, but certainly, just like you said, we have individuals all over the world doing this, and we have sourcing of for example, the motors, came from one country and now are coming from another, because they're just that much better and things like that. So there's individuals and partners we're working with. It really is globally, but my interactions are mostly with the US team.
No, fantastic. So I thank you for your time, John. I have a lot
Oh
of other
yeah,
questions that I think we'll take probably for another one. I think 1 hour and a half is good.
this doesn't have to be the only interview we have. We can have more.
Yeah,
It's
no,
okay.
no, no, definitely. I'm very interested. You are a great person to interview, and a lot of very good questions. And I'm a huge fan of Koda. I love robotics, but I think what you guys are doing is really impressive. So I will be promoting, and our team will be promoting as well. So thank you so much, John, and congratulations to all your team.
Thanks.